Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
So after weeks of watching episodes in Joseph's life, I feel like this part of Genesis is, the first Netflix series, right? Where you're watching these episodes go by. We finally this week get to the climax. This moment of reunion between Joseph and his brothers. Now, let's just remember for a moment what has happened, right? These brothers of Joseph have tried to kill him. They were certainly jealous of him. They wound up selling him away. After that, he started to make his way as a slave back up and started to do great things. And another downturn, he wound up after his experience with Potiphar's wife in jail. Finally, after that, he's able to get himself out, and now he is Pharaoh's number 2. And his brothers are in front of him, not knowing who he is, and begging for food. Because back in the land of Canaan, back in the land of Israel, there is a famine. Joseph had seen this through Pharaoh's dreams, and in Egypt, there was a lot of food. And so they came now to ask. And Joseph has some decisions to make. How is he going to deal with his brothers? How is he going to deal with his brothers? Now, I don't know about you, but I imagine there was some resentment there. I imagine there was some distrust there. I imagine that this was a very difficult moment. And yet, as we look at this moment in the Torah, something very interesting happens, and I think for most of us, very challenging. I don't know that many of us could do what Joseph did here, and I want to think about that and try to understand what his mind frame was. So if you open up in your Chumashim to page 276, right? That's the larger of the red books that are in front of you. Actually, on the very bottom of the previous page, 275, the beginning of chapter 45, it says, Joseph could no longer control himself, and he cried out, have everyone withdraw, everyone leave. So there was no one else around him. His sobs were so loud, verse 2, that the Egyptians could hear. And so the news of it reached Pharaoh's palace. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still well? But his brothers could not answer him, so dumbfounded they were on account of him. Now this is where I want to focus. Then Joseph said to his brothers, come forward to me. And when they came forward, he said, I am your brother Joseph, he whom you sold into slavery. Now do not be distressed or reproach yourselves because you sold me hither. It was to save life that God sent me ahead to you. It is now 2 years. There has been a famine in the land. And he goes on to say, it's because you did that I am here and I can now save my family's life. I don't know. That's a little difficult for me, right? It's a little difficult for me to say, well, all of these bad things happened just so I can do this. It's a challenging theology, don't you think? I mean, we've heard it. We've heard it in terms of the Holocaust. We've heard people say, well, if it weren't for the Holocaust, we wouldn't have the land of Israel. That is true. I would argue that is probably factually true. But did 6 million Jews have to die so that we get the land of Israel? Is that the theology that we're advocating here, right? That God is going to do these things so that X, Y, and Z good can happen. I struggle with that theology. I struggle with that theology. And so, if that's the case, what do we make of this, right? How do we see Joseph's response here in a different way that doesn't take us down this line of this type of theology where these bad things happen for a reason so that X, Y, and Z can happen? What do you think? Anybody else have a problem with this? I'm going to open it up now for a little bit of conversation. What do you think? How can we understand what's going on here with Joseph? Eric.
I always have something to say.
I love it.
So I think throughout the course of this book and that wonderful scroll over there, we find ourselves challenged almost every week, whether it be interpersonal or between person and God, where we have to do some sort of challenge, we have to suffer in order to exalt. And these are not new themes. The question really is does it matter in our current day? Do we still, your analogy here, which is relative to the conversation, is do we have to continue to suffer in order to see the good things in our life? And maybe that's what this is.
Right. So just to repeat for those who are playing our home game, Eric is saying that in not only this week, but every week it seems like there are challenges that befall individuals, that befall us as a people. There seems to be suffering that goes throughout this Torah scroll that we are going to be reading, throughout our Bible, throughout our history. And I guess then the question is there a purpose to that, right? Is there a reason that is there some benefit that we get, maybe, from that suffering? Anybody want to take a shot at answering that? What do you think? Please, Bob.
I'm not sure about benefit, but adversity is ubiquitous, and so the idea that we can triumph despite adversity is a good theme.
Okay, so Bob says, I like it a lot, that he's not sure that there's a purpose, but suffering is something that happens in life, and if we can triumph over that adversity, if we can see the good side of the other side of that, that's a valuable lesson to be able to learn.
I think it's yes, Eric, yes, Dr. Bob, yes, and there's also like a little bit of a justification here too for doing all of this. It's like he had already done his due diligence. We've gone through, like you said, it's like Netflix. He's done the testing and he's asked the right questions and he's sent them away and they come back and bring this one and bring that one, and they pretty much passed all the tests that they needed to pass for him now to say, all right, I believe that they have in their own way done their teshuvah, and now we can make this sort of, we can complete this circle. It was pretty bad stuff that happened, because the narrative does change from when he's in the dungeon to like I was thrown in a pit and then I was kidnapped and now I ended up here. Look at this. This is so horrible. To like now, like we got this. We're gonna work together as a family, reunite, and there we go.
So you said two different things. I think both are important. The first part of it is that there is, and the text describes it as a test, right? To see where his brothers are at, to see what types of people they actually are. And so perhaps, right, this suffering, this discomfort in all of this was part of a test. The question is, that's a test that Joseph has for his brothers. Why did Joseph have to suffer? Was there a test in that, right? I can understand the distrust that Joseph has for his brothers. I can understand the fact that Joseph is saying, hey, wait a second, I want to make sure of who I'm dealing with now, right? I get that. But what I don't get is why Joseph had to go through all of the adversity that he did in order to get where he was. Again, I think Dr. Bob's response is good. Well, there's benefit to that, right? We can learn, we can grow, we can become stronger. Okay. But again, that leads us ultimately to this theology of, therefore, well, if this little event that was a challenge to me made me stronger, and it was a good thing, well, what about the Holocaust? What about October 7th? What, right? And again, now we get to this place where the theology, that line of thought breaks down for me. I struggle with that. Anybody else? Please.
I feel like the adversity is what takes you off of your set path. If Joseph hadn't been through the adversity, you'd be on the family farm starving to death. And maybe someone else would take his place.
I like that. I like that a lot, actually. That adversity takes you off your set path, right? We're in a rut. Everything is fine, right? It's basic physics, right? Nobody changes. Nothing changes unless acted upon by an outside force. And that adversity is that outside force that actually allows for change, potentially, to happen in the world. What's your name? Ryan? Ryan. Right, Ryan is saying that adversity is what allows for change and growth and development to happen. I mean, we certainly see it here. I would argue that. I mean, let's face it. You know, we understand Joseph is our hero, but at the beginning of this story, he was kind of a shallow, callow, obnoxious young guy, right? And he grows because of that adversity. He learns, he grows. Good. Yes?
To answer your question about why certain people may suffer versus others, I think you might have to look at it is that it's a whole team event, where everyone is, we all as a society are one big team, and it's going together. Sometimes you have a quarterback who's throwing a touchdown to the wide receiver, and they're the heroes of the game, but nobody else necessarily thinks about the defensive people on that team or the offensive one, whoever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody's just playing a role in that society. And in order to get your tens in life, you have to go through ones.
So I like that a lot. You know, to see life not just as individuals, but as a team event, right? To see it as something that is something that we all participate in. And just when somebody is looked at as the hero, right, the quarterback, yeah, he can't throw passes if his offensive line isn't blocking people. Otherwise, he's going to get creamed every time, right? And the trainers and the coaches and absolutely. Everyone plays in. And so, you know, if you don't have those, those moments happen, and the team can help balance that. I'm paraphrasing a little bit what you say and taking it in a slightly different direction. The team can help balance that. And for me, I have to say, that's where my theology plays into this, right? There was a meme not too long ago that I saw on Facebook that said, everybody who equates causation with correlation dies. Think about it, right? Everyone who equates causation with correlation dies. Well, everyone dies. Whether or not you equate correlation and causation, right? There's a correlation that you die, but it's not causation. So the question is here, are bad things happening because God is making bad things happen? Yes. Or are bad things happening because bad things happen? Right? Is this a causation or a correlation? And what you'll find is a lot of the people who deal with these challenging moments of theology, right? These challenging moments in history, whether it be Viktor Frankl, right? In his search for meaning, he separates the act and the response. And it's a very important piece here. Is Joseph saying, well, God did this on purpose? I don't know that he's saying that as we look at this. He's saying it all happened, right? Do not be distressed. It was to save life that God sent me here. It doesn't say it was to save life that God punished me. It doesn't say it was to save life that God made these things befall me. It was a realization that Joseph had that if I change the way that I think about this event, I can actually bring some good out of it. And I think that is a positive and powerful theology. It changes the conversation from the Holocaust happened so Israel could be created to the Holocaust happened and we came back and created Israel. It's a different conversation. And I think a more healthy conversation and a more powerful conversation. And I've been struggling with this a lot, and I've been thinking, obviously, given the time that we are in right now, given the fact that my wife and I were just in Israel, we saw all of the horror and the destruction and the tragedy, and we spoke to these survivors, and trying to come up with and think about a theology that works with all of that. And it wasn't until really this week, as I was thinking about this, and a couple of things happened this week, that I started to understand that it's not a causative theology, but that it is what our response to these moments is and can be that creates our theology. Debbie and I had the opportunity on Thursday. Thank you. It's all, the week is a blur for me this week. To meet with the 5 San Diego congressional representatives, along with all of us who went on this trip, and to speak to them and think about it for a moment. First of all, think about what an amazing country that we live in. The fact that we, as just Joe average citizens, can sit down for 90 minutes with 5 congressional representatives, and that they'll sit and listen to us and talk with us. It was pretty incredible. You don't get that opportunity in a lot of other countries. But to sit with them, to tell the story of what we heard, and see the impact that it had on them. To see the shift, to see them say, wow, I didn't know that. And to see it actually change the way that they're thinking about things. To have that conversation was one of the most powerful moments I've had in a very long time. In some ways, even more powerful than when we were there in Israel. It was a very powerful opportunity to sit and to talk, but we knew what we were getting into. We knew that that's what we were there to do. We knew what we were going to hear. We knew that we were going to be there to spend time with them and to support them. And so when that happened, it was great. We didn't know what the response of our representatives was going to be. And to have, and I'm going to say it out publicly because I'm so impressed with it, to have Representative Scott Peters sit there and say, I didn't understand, and I don't understand why the hatred is there. And he was speaking not just about what was going on in Israel, but frankly what's happening right here, right now. And if you didn't know, earlier this week, Representative Peters was with his wife at dinner, and he was accosted by some pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas protesters who interrupted their dinner and started accosting them, and he handled it very, very well. It was all being taped and all being filmed, right? And that gave him a little bit of a taste of what it was like to be Jewish right now. Just a taste. And to have him stop and say, I'm sorry. And that's what he said. I'm sorry for what you are going through. Was incredibly powerful. Now, do I believe that God created this situation so that he could say that? No, I don't. But do I believe that God helped us create an environment to take something that was horrific and learn to make something good out of it, or try, as Viktor Frankl talked about so often, in terms of the fact that the survivors of the Holocaust, the survivors in the camp, were the people that were able to see past this moment and look to something in the future, look to something better, look to something good. Those were the people that survived. Yes, that's what I believe. And I think as we look at this, I'll close with actually a thought from the Tanya, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. Hold on, it's in this book, not that one. I just lost it. Where did it go? All right, I'm going to have to paraphrase it because I don't see it here. My apologies. Oh, here it is. He writes that if we change the way we think, we change the way we feel. That first step is reframing. Reframing an event doesn't mean changing the event. It doesn't mean taking away the pain and the challenge and the suffering sometimes that we feel in these moments in our life, because they happen. And we may not have the ability to change any of that. But we can change the way that we think about it. We can reframe it. We can say, how do we look to take this and take those next steps? To tell the story of October 7th so that we can get change in this world. To tell it to the media, to tell it to our representatives, to tell it to those people that are around us. In the same way that the results of the Holocaust, while horrific, were able to create some of the most important aspects of Jewish life. Something to think about in these days as this Torah portion leads us to the end of the book of Genesis. And we're going to now go into more challenges. As Genesis ends, it's as if, well, everything is great. We're riding off into the sunset. And then in the very, very beginning of the next weekend, there was a new Pharaoh that didn't know Joseph. One thing after the next. It happens. How do we deal with it? That's the question. That is probably one of the most important that face us as Jews and us as human beings. Shabbat Shalom.